You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 28th of January 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up,
we are also here to proclaim that we will never allow history to repeat itself.
What do Germany, Poland and the rest of Europe need to do to reassure those who survived the Nazi death camps that history will never see the likes of the Holocaust again? We'll ask whether yesterday's Memorial Day focused minds. Also coming up, boxes are packed, cupboards emptied and hundreds of refugees are left in an uncertain future as the UN's Palestinian aid agency is told to clear out of East Jerusalem. Plus,
and what we've seen in the last 3 decades, that software and the digitalization literally has turned the world upside down.
More wisdom from Davos as we look at the recent influences tech has had on the way we do business. Plus, the newspapers and why Saudi Arabia is holding an art biennale in an airport. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in today's news. Hamas says more than 300,000 displaced Palestinians have returned to the ruins of northern Gaza. The US chipmaker Nvidia has lost more than $500 billion following the emergence of a chatbot developed by the Chinese AI firm DeepSeek. And France's Prime Minister has accused the world's richest man and close ally of President Trump, Elon Musk, of posing a threat to democracies. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, yesterday, at a ceremony at Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Nazi death camp where 1.1 million people were murdered, from every testimony of those remaining, there rose determination that we should learn from what they had suffered.
We are also here to proclaim that we will never allow history to repeat itself.
That was the voice of Tova Friedman, the author and academic born in Poland and one of the youngest survivors of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Well, one commentator suggested that although history does not and cannot repeat itself, patterns of human behaviour do. And it is in this context that the alarm is sounding across Germany and also Poland. Reports suggest ignorance of the Holocaust is creeping in among the younger generation of Germans. Combined with this, the rise of far-right populism is attracting characters such as the American billionaire Elon Musk, who's thrown his weight behind the far-right AfD party. Well, I'm joined now from Warsaw by Stuart, Dowell, a journalist based there, and by Sudha David-Wilp, Vice President of External Relations and Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund's Berlin office. A very good morning to you both.
Good morning. Hello.
Sudha, let me begin with you. There is that sense of hope, isn't it, that the Nazis didn't win, but there is also the fear that history doesn't repeat itself, however, patterns of human behaviour do. What is the fear in Germany at the moment?
So Germany has had a strong memory culture about the Holocaust and Holocaust education in its post-World War II history. And before the anniversary event yesterday, Chancellor Scholz did express concern about the dwindling knowledge about Holocaust, especially among young people. And I think there's a sense of change here in Germany as the country faces elections, that a new era is upon them. And they see that, the rise of populist parties on the right and left are affecting the memory culture and affecting people's knowledge of history and forgetting about those so-called lessons from the past.
So is there a sense that people are forgetting what is happening, or indeed just that time has placed a block between awareness of what happened in the 1940s and what is happening in Germany nowadays?
Oh, I mean, you saw yesterday at this anniversary event, even the number of eyewitnesses are obviously not present at these anniversary events. I think there were like 300 at the one 10 years ago, and I believe yesterday were only 50. And I think it's quite jarring that the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz pretty much coincided with an AfD rally, the far-right party in Germany that's coming in second in the polls at the moment, featuring Elon Musk telling Germans that they shouldn't be sort of hung up about their history. So I think, again, there is this idea of this is a very confident, also proud of its democracy, and embrace military spending because of all the new geopolitical challenges that the country is facing. At the same time, I think that leaders also understand that Germany still needs to have responsibility of the past, and that is really disappearing in schools because of demographic change, and obviously no longer having ties to eyewitnesses of history.
And how much, Stuart, is this being experienced in Poland as well? Because you've had several years under the Law and Justice Party, where several controversial laws were passed, the 2018 Holocaust law, which they had to pull back on. But the fact remains is that Poland, being at the heart of so much that happened, and people still remembering that quite a lot of people never ever had grandparents simply because they died in the war. There is there still that palpable sense that things need to be kept in the public conscience?
Of course, yes. The memory of World War II is a constant feature of Polish public life, and talking about the re-emergence of right-wing politics, that's happening in Poland as well. The Konfederacja Party, which is a grouping of three right-wing parties in Poland, is now the third power in Polish politics, and is set to be the kingmaker in the establishment of a new coalition, even when that happens. And even the Donald Tusk's government, in its recent policy moves, has moved visibly towards the right in order to try to take up that space.
And what does that mean in terms for the way that the direction that Poland is going? Because it does wrestle with itself quite strongly, doesn't it? Because the Law and Justice Party pushed Poland in a very populist direction. Yet, as you say, Donald Tusk is and his party is being pulled further to the right as well.
Yes, the centre of gravity in Polish society is, I would say, on the centre right, and the ruling coalition, although it's a very broad coalition from quite far left to centre right, is generally centre left, but in order to place itself, for example, with the upcoming presidential election, it has to occupy the centre-right ground. And we've seen recently with decisions on, for example, not allowing asylum seekers to submit asylum applications in Poland. That's just an example of how the government is trying to occupy that ground.
Just going back, Stuart, to the Auschwitz-Birkenau memorial service yesterday, there was applause when the Ukrainian president took his turn to place a votive candle in front of one of the train wagons that transported people to their death. And there was a very strong sense that war is close and war is actual across the border. How much does that shape the way that Poland reacts, or the way that Poland pushes itself forward?
Yes, of course. The awareness that Ukraine is fighting not just for itself but for the east of Europe as well is very, very palpable in Poland. And at the moment, because of the presidential elections, Ukraine and Ukrainians in Poland have become a subject and a theme in that election. And even though there's an awareness that we need to support Ukraine, that Poles need to support Ukraine, the negative sentiment towards Ukrainians in Poland is growing, unfortunately.
Sudha, returning to you in Germany, we've heard in the last 24 hours that France's Prime Minister has accused the world's richest man and close ally of President Trump, Elon Musk, of posing a threat to democracies. There's clearly a wider sound, a wider warning sound now coming from the rest of Europe. How much do you think that will change things, given the fact that Elon Musk has been able to jump into the German narrative very, very quickly, simply because of his global influence already?
Well, I think European countries are in a difficult situation because they see that Elon Musk is in the inner circle of President Trump's White House. And so Europe obviously still needs to work with America on many challenges, on many interests that are mutual. But at the same time, a recent poll in Germany see that 3/4 of Germans see the Musk's attempt to influence German elections as unacceptable. And I think that many European leaders here are not pleased with Elon Musk's interventions in terms of national dialogue, because these populist parties are looking to split Europe and are very Europe skeptic. So, and it's been a big burden for the establishment party. So it's a very tricky situation at the moment.
And finally, Sudha, just staying with you to talk about the more general attitude to all this. The warning that was made yesterday was that the greatest danger to good isn't evil, it is indifference, and the reminder that those who did perpetrate the war crimes of the Nazi era were humans themselves, and that it started in kitchens and households and living rooms across Germany. Is there a sense that people are trying to stop that now?
Well, I actually think, we focus on the headlines about the AfD and the rightward shift in Europe and even in the United States, but we should also remember that a lot of German citizens have also gone out on the streets to protest the right-wing party and its use of rhetoric that mimics the Nazi language of the past. And so I think that it's not necessarily one-sided, and the problem is that the fabric of the political party system is fragmented right now, and so it's very easy to put attention on the far right and the far left, whereas most voters are in the middle. But certainly, I think we'll see in the election to come that important issues like migration and inflation also have to be dealt with for the establishment parties to make their democracies resilient all across Europe.
Sudha David-Wilp in Berlin and Stuart Dowell in Warsaw, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. It's 9:14 in Gaza City, 7:14 a.m. here in London. Now, there are warnings that tens of thousands of refugees could lose access to services such as healthcare and education as soon as the end of this week, as the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency, Unrwa, vacates its headquarters in East Jerusalem. The agency has been banned from operating both in Israel and in the Palestinian territories. I'm joined now by Ahmed Bayram, who's Middle East and North Africa regional media advisor to the Norwegian Refugee Council. A very good morning to you, Ahmed. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Just could you please remind us what led to this ban?
Of course, the Knesset law has decided that Unrwa was involved in the 7th of October atrocities, despite an investigation by the UN independent investigation showing that it was largely the claims were largely untrue. But that has actually started a series of actions which have ended in banning Unrwa from operating in the occupied territories, the occupied Palestinian territories. And now we have reached a point where we are facing a massive black hole in aid, since UNRWA is the largest provider of aid and has been for decades for Palestinians in the country and in the region.
Tell us what this black hole will look like. I mean, we're hearing reports that as they pack their bags and empty the cupboards and lock things up, they are also leaving tens of thousands of refugees without access to healthcare and education. And no one really knows what's going to happen after Friday.
Of course, I mean, UNRWA has been supporting Palestinian refugees. I have seen their work firsthand in refugee camps in Lebanon, for example, in Lebanon, where they have provided healthcare, education, almost everything, including legal support as well. And now these roles that UNRWA play across the board are going to be very hard to replace. They coordinate aid, they provide shelter, they provide schooling for kids. And the list goes on. And, no single organization and no group of organization can actually replace UNRWA, because we're talking about, tens of thousands of working force that UNRWA has. And of course, this is a blow to over 2 million civilians in Gaza who are just trying to get back on their feet. So probably, this is the worst time to be banning an organization of this size and magnitude and of course bandwidth with all the programs that it has.
The difficulty, however, is at the moment that Israel votes that UNRWA's neutrality has been compromised, there was really no way back, was there, for UNRWA?
In many ways, not, because partly because it looks like there's the politics has overridden the situation here, and in many ways politics has been put ahead of the humanitarian situation here and the humanitarian suffering. And of course, you're effectively punishing an entire organization for the act of individuals who have, of course, if proved right, of course they would have committed these atrocities. But if you look at what's happening in the region and what's happening in Gaza and in the West Bank, this is going to be a punishment for Palestinians, because Palestinians will find themselves overnight losing out on, what has been fending off starvation, what has been fending off, illiteracy, what has been fending off diseases almost in every place where they are now being banned. So we wanted a reversal of that, because we think that, civilians will be the biggest losers here.
This is the first forced eviction of a UN agency from one of its member states. What are the wider implications of this for the United Nations and its ability to do its job?
I mean, of course, you say first, and so we have to say for the first time what that means. But it will also, I think it sets a dangerous precedence here that the humanity and humanitarian issues can actually be played politics with. This is. In the end, you're looking at an organization, like I said, that has probably 30,000 people working for it, being told to go home with no replacement. I think it does infringes on the integrity, on the credibility of us all, really, as a humanitarian community who are not able to stand up to what is right. And I think what is happening, we have seen this, by the way, for 16 months. We have seen signs of that in Gaza, where politics has overtaken everything, including humanitarian issues, which are supposed to be protected. The humanitarian suffering should never be touched by politics unless it's for good. Should never be, violated by diplomatic, games, really, that are being played here. So it's a precedent, of course, that we're seeing, a dangerous one and a dangerous move. And like I said, we hope to see a diplomatic situation for this. That spares the millions of lives of particularly, of course, of Palestinian people, not just in the country, but also in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Jordan.
Ahmed Bayram, Middle East and North Africa Regional Media Advisor. Thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Stay with us on The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Let's continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio, Robin Brunt, BBC's former China correspondent, and a very welcome voice around the table. Good morning, Robin. How are you? How's the world of brand?
Yeah, we're good.
What are you up to?
Turkey, yeah. We're, we're managing, we're juggling, but there's good China stuff around this morning, so it's perfect that our kind of world should align.
We are very, very pleased that you have come in to explain DeepSeek. I think there's quite a lot of head scratching this morning going on, not least, from mere mortals like us around the microphone, but also I think, the fact that Donald Trump has now waded in and said that American tech firms need to sort of buck up is a suggestion that actually I think we need a bit of a translation, a bit of an explainer here. What happened yesterday and why?
Well, look, DeepSeek claims to be AI on the cheap, or certainly much, much better value. We've had a period of huge investment in artificial intelligence technology, from everything from, the chips themselves to everything on the supply chain, the data centers, our ability to produce the energy that's going to be needed to power this technology of the future. Just last week, the new president committed, $500 billion of investments into a whole swathe of AI-related technologies. And now a Chinese startup comes along and says, we can do this on the cheap. We can do it using far fewer microprocessors. We can do it using far less money invested in the hardware. And this is a good thing for DeepSeek. It's a good thing, maybe for you, if you believe in the democratization of technology. Maybe it will lead to a huge uptake in terms of AI and adoption at a much quicker rate. But if you are NVIDIA, up until yesterday morning, the world's biggest company, if you're a pension holder with money in Microsoft, in NVIDIA, in Google this morning, it's not a great day for you because investors got worried yesterday.
Well, it's quite interesting, actually, because the Financial Times is talking about it's talking about what's happening in Silicon Valley, and those there are saying that this massive sell-off that we saw yesterday, I think I sort of had to double check the headlines when I said $500 billion is an overreaction. I think people are sort of starting to buy quite a lot of NVIDIA this morning, assuming that this will be a bounce back. But there is this enormous development being made by the likes of the China, isn't it? Because the FT is reporting that Huawei, obviously coming up as a massive competitor against NVIDIA for chips, but also Huawei's been working with the likes of DeepSeek. They're getting very good at this kind of stuff. One wonders, why is this such a big surprise?
Well, I think it's a surprise because all the focus has been on the US. It's been on the names that we're becoming increasingly familiar with. NVIDIA, one of those, Microsoft and others ploughing tens and tens of billions of dollars into this technology. And yet, relatively quietly, for two reasons, under this industrial policy program the Chinese have had for decades now, called Made in China 2025, but also partly because China's companies were frozen out of global technological manufacturing. You just mentioned Huawei there. They've been forced to get on with their own thing and do it domestically and try and progress and rely on technology that can't be provided by the Americans or the Dutch or the Japanese. And they have, as we're seeing yesterday, advanced. Now, look, there are, I think, two things to ask. Firstly, this is open source technology. Have they relied to a certain extent on the large large language models that have been developed by other competitors to get to where they've got. So is it sustainable? And secondly, their ability of the Chinese to make their own highly advanced chips that NVIDIA has been doing. How quickly and how far have they really progressed? How close are they to the Americans and others?
This seems to be sort of just a matter of time issue, though, doesn't it? Because we're seeing what China has managed to do since globalization pushed Western companies into China, and they never assumed that China would actually be taking notes. And now China has come back and is now posing a major threat to the likes of the electric car industry in Europe and across America. The fact that we are so dependent on Chinese goods. Didn't anyone see this coming?
Well, look, you're right. I mean, you've touched on the big strategic mistake, some would say many made, by allowing China into the World Trade Organization in 2001. The sense that it was going to come in, it was going to be for the benefit of mankind. Maybe it was a country that would liberalise and democratise in terms of its politics. Or on the other hand, did it frankly just benefit from all the investment by the VWs, by the American industrial giants into its country, learn from them and then turn the tide? That appears, the latter, to be what China has actually done.
Let's stay with China, but not with an economic sense, or perhaps an economic sense, but quite a sweet one as well. It now appears that if you are Chinese, you don't have children, you get a dog.
Yeah, I mean, China's demographic time bomb, a familiar challenge as well for many in Western liberal democracies, is a real existential threat for that country. And here's another perfect illustration of the change in attitudes, the change in choices we're seeing, particularly among young professional people, particularly among young professional women in China. They don't want to get married to the extent that their parents did. They don't want to have children. They're a more selfish generation. It's a very expensive endeavour, huge commitments in terms of that Chinese attitude of kind of filial piety, having to look after your parents later. So they're spending more money on animals. And we now know there are more cats and dogs in China, according to a report, I think, from Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, than there are infants and toddlers. And I remember talking to the boss of Mars a few years ago when I was living in China. They're famous for their confectionery, but they're very big in the pet food world as well. And the amount of money they were putting into developing their supply chain, developing their manufacturing in China in terms of pet food, a lot of ancillary products around that world. The consumer spend on these animals now, and we saw it particularly during COVID. Many people on social media saying how tough it was for their dogs and their cats because they had nowhere to go when they're locked up in their flats. This is a perfect illustration of that changing demography we're seeing in China. And you're right, it does have huge economic impact on the future of that country.
And brilliant if you run a doggy hospital, according to the South China Morning Post. It also talks, and let's keep with the economic things, that the economy is now being boosted by this large rise in the pet economy, changing consumption patterns. People still need a cuddle, but they're and it's also a big thing for the elderly as well. Yeah,
so it's the old who are lonely increasingly, and it's the young who have made that lifestyle choice not to have children, or certainly not to have children earlier on in their lives. And you're right, it's a great example of a shift away from big public investment and an export-led economy towards more of a domestic consumer economy. And this is a perfect example of the kind of shift that Xi Jinping and those in charge of the Communist Party in China want to see. But of course, the bigger problem here is they might be spending more money domestically, but there are going to be fewer people in the years ahead because they're having fewer children who are going to be able to spend that money working the factories.
We just got to teach the cats and dogs to make chips and in electric cars.
Well, that kind of brings us back to the deep-seek and AI, doesn't it? But there you go.
Robin Brandt, thank you as ever for joining me in the studio. The time here in London is 7:30 a.m. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A look now at some of today's other news headlines. Hamas says more than 300,000 displaced Palestinians have returned to the ruins of northern Gaza. As part of the ceasefire deal with Israel, 6 more hostages are to be freed in 2 batches later this week. But Israel has confirmed that 8 of the hostages due to be freed in the first phase are now dead. The US chipmaker Nvidia has lost more than $500 billion following the emergence of a chatbot developed by a Chinese AI firm. DeepSeek has become the most downloaded free app on the Apple Store. It's caused the value of several high-worth technology firms to fall. France's Prime Minister has accused the world's richest man and close ally of President Trump, Elon Musk, of posing a threat to democracies. François Bayrou also said that money should not give the right to rule consciences. Last week, Monsieur Bayrou warned that France and Europe as a whole would have to stand up to Donald Trump and his policies or risk being dominated, crushed and marginalised. And the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has officially been declared the winner of a 7th term in office, following an election Western governments have rejected as a sham. Lukashenko, who faced no serious challenge, took 86.8% of the vote. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 8:31 in Berlin. Now, the use of drones in the war between Russia and Ukraine has had a transformative effect on the conflict. First, for those mired in the trenches on the front line, the constant buzzing above adds a permanent threat and tension to the already appalling conditions. But secondly, it has removed the need to expose soldiers to certain dangers. In one such case, Ukraine claims to have successfully attacked some Russian targets using unmanned ground-based drones. Well, Christopher Miller is the chief Ukraine correspondent for the Financial Times and author of The War Came to Us, Life and Death in Ukraine. I'm delighted to say he joins me now. Very good morning to you, Christopher.
Good morning.
So explain to us, what exactly are these ground-based drones?
Well, Ukraine has a series of ground-based drones, naval drones, aerial drones. There are ground-based drones that evacuate wounded, for example, not putting soldiers in any greater harm's way, evacuating them from the battlefield. But they also now have these combat drones that we're seeing being used increasingly so as Ukraine faces a manpower issue. So instead of sending infantry troops into battle, solely, now Ukraine is using a combination in certain places on the front line of infantry troops as well as these ground combat drones. Some of them are equipped with machine guns. Some of them are equipped with anti-tank missile systems, rocket systems. They are used in combination, again, with infantry forces, artillery units, everything that Ukraine has at its disposal now.
Explain, therefore, what happened in this incident a couple of days ago when Ukraine says it successfully attacked some Russian targets using these drones.
Yeah, so Ukraine has said that on more than one occasion now it has used solely ground-based, fully robotic operational combat drones in fights with Russian military units that are advancing on the battlefields across eastern and southern Ukraine here. So this is one of the first times in which Ukraine did not send its own soldiers into combat, but rather used these robots to conduct operations against the Russians. The Russians are using their own drones as well, but this was the first time that Ukraine says the Russians faced a fully drone force against them.
What difference do you think it could make in this war?
Well, Ukraine is facing a serious manpower issue. The Russian nation is just significantly bigger than Ukraine, and that means that they have more resources to draw from. So Ukraine is both outgunned but also outmanned, and these ground-based combat drones are going to help fill some of that gap that it faces in terms of its manpower shortages. There are an array of drones that Ukraine is deploying on the battlefield. There are reconnaissance and surveillance drones. These are used to gather intelligence, monitor enemy movements, assist in artillery targeting. There are these combat drones, of course, that we've spoken about that not only exist on the ground, but also there are naval drones equipped with explosives and missile systems. There are aerial drones, of course, that are used in combat as well. They use these Mavic first-person view drones. These are small drones that are equipped with explosives that can fly and target enemy forces, their armored personnel vehicles, even zip through windows in occupied buildings and trenches. So there's an array of drones that the Ukrainians are using to fill some of the gaps in artillery shortages, and in manpower shortages.
And explain a little more about what this demonstrates in terms of the way that Russia and Ukraine do with their soldiers, with their manpower. The idea that it has been suggested that Ukraine's willingness to use drones in such an experimental way suggests that they are perhaps rather more protective of who they send into battle.
Well, sure, it's crucial that Ukraine not waste its resources, both human and material, and so using these drones helps to offset those losses, right, and to limit them. So, these drones are being used by both sides. I think it's important to underscore that the Russians also have significant capabilities when it comes to drones. They're also ramping up production in Russia, just as Ukraine is here. And so, these drones are completely reshaping the battlefield as we know it. You will see old artillery systems from 80 years ago, 50 years ago, 40 years ago being used, but they're being used alongside tanks and in conjunction with these modern military systems, including these drones that are, as you mentioned, being used to fill these voids and not to make it so that fewer people are being used in places like the infantry, where Ukraine faces these shortages.
Where are we at the moment with the Russian invasion of Ukraine? I mean, we're hearing just there about Ukraine's pushback, but Russian forces have been intensifying their assaults in Donetsk Oblast. They've been encircling troops. Who's winning at the moment?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a question of who is winning and who is losing. I think both sides have endured some significant losses in terms of both material and human losses, right? The Russians are losing more than 1,000 soldiers killed and wounded every day. The Ukrainians are probably losing dozens, if not hundreds, every day. The fighting is intense. Russian troops are advancing on the battlefield in eastern Ukraine, and the Ukrainian troops are having a really difficult time halting their advance. They've managed to slow those advances, but not to completely stop them. And there's several reasons why. Manpower is one of them. Other reasons include, just not having strong enough defenses ahead of these Russian assaults over the last year, as well as the responsibility of Ukraine's Western allies to send artillery systems, weapon systems to Ukraine to fill its weapons coffers, right? I mean, the resources that Ukraine needs to fight back what is one of the largest and most powerful militaries in the world is huge, and Ukraine is expending a lot of these resources. And it has said, and President Volodymyr Zelensky has said, it's also on Western allies to help Ukraine and continue this flow of weapon systems. And right now, one of the big questions that Ukraine faces, and that will determine whether or not it is successful in holding back these Russian advances, is just what type of support is Ukraine going to get from its Western allies, particularly the United States and the new President Donald Trump over the next coming months and year.
Well, let's just finally briefly on Trump. In his first week, he laid out an incredibly strongly worded threat to Moscow, which I think took quite a lot of people by surprise. What's been the reaction?
He did. The Ukrainians are cautiously optimistic. They believe that a President Trump is someone who does want to make a deal and see this war end. The trick is to do it, though, from a position of Ukrainian strength. They want Donald Trump to view them as the side that should win this conflict, that the United States is a partner in this war, and that providing them with the material and resources they need to put them in a position of strength, to negotiate from a position of strength when they do sit down at the negotiating table with Putin is the best way to go about solving this. So they were encouraged by the words of Trump in saying that he would stiffen sanctions against Russia if it didn't want to come to the negotiating table. But there is still no coherent policy put forward by the Trump administration yet, and that does have some of the Ukrainians concerned.
Christopher Miller, based in Ukraine, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Well, as the DeepSeek headlines have been demonstrating in the last 24 hours, the rapid rise of AI has meant that governments and companies around the world have had to prepare and in many cases react to the emergence of new technologies. But how can authorities best prepare for potential attacks? One of the ways is you hack them. Nicolas Maillancourt is the founder and global CEO of DreamLab Technologies, who's been hacking companies, states and authorities for more than 25 years, legally and at their request, in order to identify security fragilities and then to fix them. He joined Monocle's Carlotta Rebello in Davos last week. Carlotta began by asking Nick how he ended up becoming an ethical hacker.
When we actually started 3 decades ago, our main work was to protect IT systems and the information they carried. So it was more of a technical task, if you will. And what we've seen in the last 3 decades, that software and the digitalization literally has turned the world upside down. We now depend on every day, on every interaction, on the proper functioning of the digital space. So it has evolved greatly from being a technical service to protecting societies at large.
And tell me then about, I guess the idea, we were talking about this just before we started our interview live, that this is one of the biggest risks that society is facing. And cybercrime is one of the biggest dangers. So tell me a bit about the role of the work that you do and just the scale of it.
The scale, I start with the scale. There are 2 actually big risks on global stability and societies at large. One is, of course, environmental, climate shift and everything that comes out of that. And the second is actually cyber and cybercrime. To give you a size, in the year 2022, all damages recorded by insurance companies globally for environmental damages has been 125 billion to settle. Guess the number for cybercrime. It has been more than 5 trillion, 5,000 billion. So that's the size of the elephant that we talk about. And in the perspective of nations, it's the 3rd largest economy globally that we're talking about. So that's the size of cybercrime back in 2022. And it is growing rapidly, actually exponentially. Those numbers, you cannot just write them off. We have to take that seriously, and we have to take due care and fix and secure our systems.
And tell me then, how does the process of someone then engaging with you and with your company go about? So let's say a state comes to you and says, we want you to identify how vulnerable we are. Is that the end of the communication, as in they don't know what to expect coming from you, right?
Unfortunately, they don't really expect, they don't really know what they're going to... That's the point. They should know better, and that's what we're all about. I can actually give you a success story that we've done in the environment of the UN ITU. So we have taken a nation that had the will to improve cybersecurity substantially. And what we've done as a first step, we measured the entire attack surface of that country in question, and we discovered all the vulnerabilities, all the loopholes, and all the issues. You can imagine that was a big report with a lot of red marks in it. As a second step, we went into a consultancy phase, assuring that the nation, the economy, the government, the military, all of them understood what those vulnerabilities are about and what the impact can be. Then something magical actually happened. The nation said, hey, we understood. We are now going to take action. This nation has displayed extremely enormous, impressive performance. They fixed 90% of their vulnerabilities of their public attack surface within 3 months. So you can do it. And on top of that, it was a least developed country in Africa. So they did not have heavy investment capabilities. They just went and made the work.
Is it in a weird way easier to deploy some of the solutions in a place that I'm not necessarily saying this was the case, but generally speaking, in a place that perhaps doesn't have that many systems and basically needs to build them from the beginning, is it more difficult to try to change what's already in place than when you have to put it up from scratch?
Of course, specifically African countries, they just leapfrogged. For a long time, they did not adopt technology, and then they just went full in. And in many countries, we can see more advanced systems than we have in Europe, for instance. Payment systems, government systems. So they're actually leading, which is kind of counterintuitive. But yes, it is easier to build something new than to evolve and improve a legacy. That's one thing. The other thing that I really would like to highlight, cybersecurity does not necessarily need to be expensive. 80% of cybersecurity is basically applying common sense, is basically applying hygiene, which is not costly at all. You could compare this to brushing your teeth daily. If you do that in the morning, in the evening, throughout your entire life, it doesn't cost you a thing, and it works well. If you miss it once, nothing really bad will happen. If you miss it for 10 years or 20 years, it'll be very painful and very costly. And I believe this is the state Western nations are in today.
Well, Nick, you have painted quite a picture of, the situation, the risks, and also the impact that cybercrime and therefore cybersecurity can have in the world. I know as well that the Swiss Cybersecurity Days is a big project and event that you've been championing as well to almost do a bit of this outreach as well. So tell me a bit more about that too.
Thank you so much. The Swiss Cybersecurity Days are very dear to my heart. In this platform, we try to animate and educate and inform policymakers, board level and C-level people to understand and appreciate chances and opportunities of digitalization, and also risks and how to actually address those risks in the cyberspace. We are sparking a societal dialogue, specifically for lay people, so to say, policymakers, presidents, ministers, so they do understand the importance and also their option space, and in the hope that more action will be taken.
I am super curious to hear if your work has made you more skeptical of technology.
I've always been a big fan of technology. I want to put that forward. I do believe that this stuff has the potential to drive us to a utopian place, if well done. And unfortunately, we're not really good at doing it good. So we're more on another path. And that's what drives me every day, to assure that we'll be using the technology for good.
And that was Nick Mayonkor, CEO and founder of DreamLab Technologies, talking to Monocle's Carlotta Rebello in Davos. You're listening to The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
7:49 here in London. Now, the second edition of the Islamic Arts Biennale has opened in the Saudi city of Jeddah, and it's all taking place in an airport. Titled "And All That Is In Between," it is organised at the Western Hajj Terminal of King Abdulaziz International Airport. And one man who's been there for the opening weekend is Tim Abrams, contributing editor to the Architectural Record. He also happens to join me now on the radio. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Emma. How are you?
Very well, thank you. I'm very intrigued to know whether it really did all take place in an airport.
It does take place in an airport, but this is a very particular kind of airport. It takes place in the Hajj terminal. Now, as many of you know, or as I particularly found out, that the Jeddah is the primary arrival point for pilgrimages to Mecca. And because of the Hajj taking place through a very short window in June this year, it creates an amazing logistical need for a sudden expansion. And so there is a terminal in Jeddah which is used only once for a very short period of time during the year, and the rest of the time it's empty. It's a beautiful structure though. It's huge, tall, built in the 1980s, Teflon canopied roofs, a lovely structure.
And obviously absolutely ripe for an Islamic Arts Biennale.
Indeed, the Islamic Arts Biennale is a very interesting event. It takes a bit of a while because you're going. It's in an airport. It's once every 2 years. What's going on here? It's actually not a contemporary arts biennale. We're used to biennale being associated with new work, curators bringing together the latest artists. There is a contemporary art component, but the Islamic Arts Biennale is a very interesting event because it brings together works from around the Islamic world, which date back to the 7th century all the way up to the contemporary point, but it is actually historical artifacts which is bringing together, and it's bringing together in a very important place, this place of jump off to Mecca. So we have the Saudi government using itself as an arrival point for Mecca and presenting itself as a custodian of the Islamic arts world.
It doesn't all come from the Islamic world, though, does it? Because we have contributions from the likes of Denmark, France. I think there was even someone from the Vatican was actually contributing to this Biennale. That you've had things. I think there was a 6-meter map of the Nile, which has left its home from the Vatican archives for the first time.
Indeed, the Vatican Apostolic Library is a huge contributor to the Biennale. The particular map you refer to, emanates from a Turkish explorer who created these maps to show off the places he'd been to. And for the first time, the map of the Nile that he created for himself and the map of the Euphrates for the first time are being brought together, one of which being controlled by owned by the Vatican. The main aspect to it, though, is that for the first time, around these other organizations come around the main component, which is the there's going to be a lot of Islamic Arabic, which I'm not going to pronounce very well. Al-Badaya, which is the beginning area, and for the first time ever, the Kiswa, which is normally covers the Kaaba stone, which is at the center of the pilgrimage to Mecca. Giving honor to it is the heart of it. This cloth, which is normally cut up and sent around the Islamic world afterwards, for the first time, this is being displayed for pilgrims, for non-pilgrims, and for visitors like me from outside the Islamic world. So you have this very strong sense that there is a culture of craft and creation, which is hitherto hidden within the Islamic world, which is being shown off. And around this, they call it al-Madar, the orbit, are works like these maps that you identify. Also, incredibly, and anyone who's doing their taxes at the moment, there is a book which is from the Apostolic Library by Fibonacci, which is the first time that the number 0 is used in the Western world, and Fibonacci took this from the Islamic world, this concept of 0 as an improving accounting system. So this is incredible. You're suddenly witness to this incredible dialogue between different civilizations. It's a wonderful experience, I must say.
Who is this aimed at? Is this aimed at those who have a knowledge of the Islamic arts, who are steeped in it, who are from the region, or is this much more of an effort to open up the world, as you say, with artifacts which are relevant to global society?
That's a very good question. I think what the Saudis are trying to do is both. One of the components is very much, if you read the Vision 2030 document, which is the economic development plan, which the Saudis have used as the ideological backing for great projects like the Line, being huge modernist, futuristic kind of development projects. There's also within that a statement about the Saudis should develop and promote themselves more as the custodians of Islamic culture, both in a regional sense, but it also in a global way. And what the Islamic Arts Biennale promotes this. You have the desire on one hand to increase the number of pilgrims from around 30 13.5 million a year at the moment to 30 million a year by 2030. But you also have this idea of if you cannot take the pilgrim to Mecca, then the material from Mecca can come to a secondary place. And yes, there's a sense that it's for the Islamic world, but it's also very much for the wider world as well.
And the influence that we now see, and you talked about this influence in the wider world, but what can we learn from the Islamic world that perhaps we might not have learned had we not gone, or had you not gone to the Biennale for us?
I think the main thing I was taken with was the great material production, the high quality of material production. Standing beneath the kiswa, which normally clads the cube of the Kaaba, which we're used to seeing in images of Mecca, if we haven't never been there, or if we've seen it face to face. One of the things that you really become face to face with is the great tradition of. We are used to the Christian religious art being the centerpiece, the origin point for the artistic tradition in Europe or America. But what we have here is another huge, long-standing tradition, textile-based, wooden-based, working with other materials that exists in parallel. That there is an amazing tradition. The best contemporary art pieces, such as Asif Khan's glass Quran made from glass folios and 24-karat gold lettering, emanates from this idea of an eternal. It's a wonderful work, and that there is this other parallel tradition that comes through it. There is also the idea of dialogue. It's very clever for the Saudis to, instead of in Doha, where there's a museum of Islamic art, which is a brilliant museum, but here what you have is a temporary event, and bringing together different institutions outside the Islamic world, who through tradition, through processes of empire, have gained access to these objects, but bringing them back together, drawing things back together to this point in Jeddah where they are talked about and deliberated, not repatriated. They are brought together for a conversation, and the conversation takes place as equals. And I think that's an incredibly important point, and very clever too. The fact that it takes place underneath this canopy for people who just arrive briefly and fly away. It's temporary, but also the conversations, the cultural component, the dialogue is actually privileged, and the objects themselves, although wonderful, are a process for that dialogue to take place. And I think that's the really clever bit.
Tim Abrams, thank you as ever for joining me on The Globalist. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to our producers Hassan Anderson and Chris Chermak. Our researcher was Maisie Ringer and our studio manager was Lily Austin. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist's back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.